It was a chilly evening in Boston, Massachusetts, on January 17, 1950, when history was about to be written in the ink of infamy. The streets of the North End were quiet, and the wind howled off the harbor carrying the scent of salt and coal smoke. Inside the impregnable fortress of the Brinks Building at 165 Prince Street, 5 employees were wrapping up their daily duties, counting stacks of cash and sorting checks. They had no idea that they were sitting on top of a powder keg that was seconds away from exploding into the crime of the century. This was not just a robbery, it was a masterclass in criminal engineering that would baffle the Federal Bureau of Investigation for years. The Brinks Building was considered a citadel of security in the mid-20th century, a place where banks and businesses entrusted their fortunes without a second thought. Its thick brick walls and steel-barred windows projected an aura of absolute invincibility to the public eye. Inside the counting room, the air was thick with the smell of old paper money and the rhythmic thumping of rubber stamps. The employees worked with the casual efficiency of men who believed they were safe behind multiple layers of locked doors. However, the illusion of safety is often the most dangerous vulnerability of all, and tonight, that illusion was about to be shattered by a phantom crew. At exactly 7:27 in the evening, the unthinkable happened as 7 armed men materialized inside the counting room as if by magic. They wore navy blue pea coats and chauffeur caps, and their faces were obscured by grotesque Halloween masks that transformed them into rubber-faced monsters. They moved with the silent precision of a military unit, displaying a terrifying level of discipline that suggested endless hours of rehearsal. There was no shouting and no chaotic waving of weapons, just a cold and calculated command of the room. The employees were caught completely off guard, their hands freezing in mid-air as the reality of the situation washed over them. The intruders wasted no time in executing their well-practiced routine, forcing the 5 employees to the floor at gunpoint. They bound the hands of the workers and covered their mouths with adhesive tape, effectively silencing any potential alarms. The robbers worked with a speed that was almost mechanical, tossing canvas bags filled with cash and securities into large sacks they had brought with them. They bypassed the copper coins, focusing solely on the high-denomination bills and verifiable checks. It was a harvest of wealth that most people could not earn in 10 lifetimes, gathered in less than 30 minutes. Within half an hour, the 7 masked men had vanished back into the night, leaving behind 5 bound employees and an empty vault. They had made off with more than $1.2 million in cash and another $1.5 million in checks and securities. In total, the haul amounted to over $2.7 million, making it the largest robbery in the history of the United States at that time. The sheer scale of the theft was staggering, sending shockwaves through the financial world and the law enforcement community alike. It was a sum so vast it seemed abstract, a fortune stolen by ghosts who left no fingerprints and no clues. When the employees finally managed to free themselves and trigger the alarm, the police arrived to find a scene of utter confusion. The vault was open, and the floor was littered with the less valuable debris of the heist, but there was no sign of forced entry. The doors had not been blown open with dynamite, nor had the locks been picked in a way that left scratches or marks. It was as if the robbers had walked in with their own set of keys, which terrified the detectives on the scene. The lack of physical evidence was absolute, leaving the Boston Police Department with nothing but questions. The media frenzy that followed was instantaneous and relentless, with newspapers across the country splashing the story on their front pages. Headlines screamed about the Great Brinks Robbery, and the public devoured every detail of the perfect crime. It became a topic of conversation in every diner and barber shop from New York to Los Angeles. The audacity of the heist, combined with the lack of violence and the mysterious disappearance of the thieves turned the robbers into folk heroes for some. People marveled at the skill involved, wondering who possessed the genius to pull off such a feat. Enter the Federal Bureau of Investigation, led by the formidable J. Edgar Hoover, who took the robbery as a personal affront to law and order. The Bureau mobilized agents from across the nation, descending on Boston like a swarm of angry hornets. They interviewed hundreds of suspects and chased down thousands of leads, but every path seemed to end in a brick wall. The robbers had left nothing behind, not a single hair or fiber or dropped tool. It was the kind of clean job that kept veteran investigators awake at night, staring at the ceiling and replaying the events in their minds. But behind this wall of silence and perfection stood a man named Anthony Pino, a career criminal with a mind like a steel trap. Character Bible Anthony Pino is a Caucasian male of Italian descent in his 40s, heavy-set build with a round face and receding dark hair, wearing a period-appropriate wide lapel suit and a fedora. Pino was not a violent thug, but a planner, a man who viewed crime as a logistical puzzle to be solved with patience and intellect. He had spent years studying the Brinks operation, watching their trucks, and learning their schedules. For Pino, this robbery was not an impulsive act, but the culmination of a life's work. Pino had assembled a crew of 11 men, each chosen for a specific skill set and a capacity for silence. Among them was Joseph Specs O'Keefe, a man whose sharp eyes and steady nerves would play a crucial role in the heist and its aftermath. Character Bible Joseph Specs O'Keefe is a Caucasian male of Irish descent in his 30s, lean, build with sharp features and intense eyes, often wearing wire-rimmed glasses, a trench coat, and flat cap. The gang included lookouts and drivers and muscle, all united by the promise of a life-changing payout. They operated under a code of absolute secrecy, knowing that a single loose lip could sink them all. The planning phase of the operation had lasted for an incredible 18 months, a duration unheard of in the world of smash and grab crime. Pino and his men had stalked the Brinks trucks, learning the routes and the habits of the drivers down to the minute. They knew when the guards stopped for coffee, and they knew which doors were left unlocked for just a few seconds too long. It was a level of surveillance that rivaled the intelligence agencies of major nations. They were not just watching, they were learning the rhythm of the company better than the managers who ran it. The true genius of the plan lay in the acquisition of the keys to the fortress. Over the course of several months, the gang had managed to remove the lock cylinders from the outer doors of the Brinks Building one by one. They would sneak into the building when the coast was clear, remove a lock, and replace it with a dummy cylinder. They would then rush the lock to a locksmith to have a key made before returning it before anyone noticed. This painstaking process ensured that on the night of the robbery, they could walk through the doors as if they owned the place. They conducted countless dry runs, entering the building at night when the staff was gone to memorize the layout. They learned which floorboards creaked and how to avoid the sight lines of the windows. They timed their movements with stopwatches, shaving seconds off their routine until they could move through the building in total darkness. This was not just a robbery, it was a choreographed performance where every step was measured and every breath was calculated. The gang knew the interior of the Brinks Building better than they knew their own homes. As the investigation dragged on for weeks, and then months, the pressure on the Federal Bureau of Investigation intensified. The public began to mock the authorities, making jokes about the incompetence of the police in the face of such a slick operation. The robbers remained ghosts, living their lives in Boston right under the noses of the detectives hunting them. They had agreed not to spend the money for 6 years until the statute of limitations had run out. It was a test of discipline that would prove to be harder than the robbery itself. However, the perfect crime is often undone by the imperfect nature of human greed and paranoia. While the gang had successfully stolen the money, they had not accounted for the difficulty of laundering such a massive amount of cash. The bills were traceable, and spending them would raise immediate red flags. The tension began to mount within the group as they sat on a fortune they could not touch. Suspicions grew and old friendships began to fray under the weight of the secret they carried. The weak link in the chain proved to be Joseph Specs O'Keefe, who found himself in legal trouble for an unrelated crime. Character Bible Joseph Specs O'Keefe is a Caucasian male of Irish descent in his 30s, lean, build with sharp features and intense eyes, often wearing wire-rimmed glasses, a trench coat, and flat cap. O'Keefe was arrested and charged with burglary in Pennsylvania, and he needed money to hire a lawyer and fight the case. He reached out to his partners in the Brinks job, demanding his share of the loot to fund his defense. It was a request that would shatter the unity of the gang. The other members of the crew, led by Pino, were reluctant to release any funds, fearing that O'Keefe would draw attention to them. They stalled and made excuses, leaving their partner to rot in a jail cell while they sat on millions. O'Keefe felt betrayed and abandoned by the men he had trusted with his life. He watched as his legal options dwindled, and his anger began to boil over into a dangerous rage. The code of silence was being tested by the very real threat of a long prison sentence. Matters took a deadly turn when the gang decided that O'Keefe had become a liability that needed to be removed. They hired a hitman to silence him, permanently hoping to cut the loose thread before it unraveled the entire tapestry. O'Keefe survived the assassination attempt, but he was left wounded and more furious than ever. The betrayal was now absolute, and the bond of brotherhood that had held the gang together was severed by bullets. O'Keefe realized that his former friends were now his executioners. As the statute of limitations for the robbery approached its expiration date, the Federal Bureau of Investigation was running out of time. They knew that if they did not bring charges soon, the perpetrators would walk free, and the crime would go unpunished forever. The agents were desperate for a break, any crack in the armor of the gang. They kept the pressure on, interviewing associates and family members, hoping to find a weak spot. Little did they know that the break they needed was sitting in a prison cell, nursing a grudge. In a dramatic turn of events, Joseph Specs O'Keefe decided to break the underworld code of silence. Character Bible Joseph Specs O'Keefe is a Caucasian male of Irish descent in his 30s, lean, build with sharp features and intense eyes, often wearing wire-rimmed glasses, a trench coat, and flat cap. Realizing that he had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by cooperating, he reached out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He offered to tell them everything about the Brinks job in exchange for leniency and protection. It was the moment the agents had been praying for since that cold night in January 1950. O'Keefe sat down with the agents and began to weave a tale that was stranger than fiction, detailing every step of the operation. He named every member of the crew, described the planning process, and explained how they had bypassed the security systems. He told them about the lock-picking and the dry runs and the disguises. The agents listened in stunned silence as the mystery that had plagued them for 6 years was unraveled by one of its architects. The puzzle pieces finally fell into place, creating a clear picture of the crime. Armed with O'Keefe's confession, the Federal Bureau of Investigation moved quickly to round up the remaining members of the gang. In a series of coordinated raids, they arrested Anthony Pino and the other conspirators just days before the statute of limitations was set to expire. Character Bible Anthony Pino is a Caucasian male of Italian descent in his 40s, heavy-set build with a round face and receding dark hair, wearing a period-appropriate wide lapel suit and a fedora. The timing was impeccable, a cinematic twist that no screenwriter could have scripted better. The men who thought they had gotten away with it were suddenly in handcuffs, facing the full weight of the law. The arrest sent shockwaves through the city of Boston once again, but this time the headlines were about justice rather than mystery. The public, which had once cheered for the clever robbers, now watched as they were paraded into police stations. The myth of the perfect crime was dismantled, revealing a group of greedy men who had turned on each other. The trial that followed would be a spectacle, drawing reporters from all over the world to witness the downfall of the Brinks gang. During the trial, the defense attorneys tried desperately to discredit O'Keefe, painting him as a liar and a rat who would say anything to save his own skin. They attacked his character and his criminal record, hoping to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. But the level of detail in his testimony was damning, and it was corroborated by the physical evidence the police had gathered. The story O'Keefe told was too consistent and too detailed to be a fabrication. The courtroom was packed every day, with spectators eager to catch a glimpse of the men who had pulled off the heist. The atmosphere was electric with tension as the prosecutor laid out the case brick by brick. They displayed the tools used in the robbery and the diagrams of the building and the few recovered bills. It was a masterclass in prosecution, dismantling the defense with the cold, hard facts of the investigation. The gang sat in silence, their faces grim, as they watched their freedom slip away. In the end, the jury found the defendants guilty on all counts, delivering a verdict that closed the chapter on the Brinks job. The judge handed down severe sentences, ensuring that the men would spend the rest of their prime years behind bars. Anthony Pino, the mastermind who had dreamed of a life of luxury, was sentenced to life in prison. Character Bible Anthony Pino is a Caucasian male of Italian descent in his 40s, heavy-set build with a round face and receding dark hair, wearing a period-appropriate wide lapel suit and a fedora. The gamble had failed and the house had won. Despite the convictions, a significant portion of the stolen money was never recovered, adding a lingering note of mystery to the case. Rumors persisted for decades about where the cash was hidden, with some believing it was buried in the hills of Massachusetts or laundered through legitimate businesses. The missing millions became the stuff of legend, inspiring treasure hunters and conspiracy theorists alike. The Federal Bureau of Investigation continued to search for the loot, but the trail had gone cold. The Brinks robbery had a profound impact on the security industry, changing the way money was transported and stored forever. Companies across the United States upgraded their vaults and implemented stricter protocols for their employees. The days of lax security and trusting human nature were replaced by a new era of surveillance and armored protection. The heist had exposed the vulnerabilities of the system and forced a revolution in physical security. For Joseph Specs O'Keefe, his cooperation earned him a lighter sentence, but he lived the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. Character Bible Joseph Specs O'Keefe is a Caucasian male of Irish descent in his 30s, lean, build with sharp features and intense eyes, often wearing wire-rimmed glasses, a trench coat, and flat cap. In the criminal underworld, being a rat is the ultimate sin, and he knew that there were people who would never forgive him. He eventually was released and lived out his days under a new identity, a ghost in his own life. Anthony Pino died in prison, never tasting the freedom he had sought to buy with the stolen millions. Character Bible Anthony Pino is a Caucasian male of Italian descent in his 40s, heavy-set build with a round face and receding dark hair, wearing a period-appropriate wide lapel suit and a fedora. His legacy was one of brilliance wasted on greed, a cautionary tale for anyone who believes they can outsmart the system. The man who had orchestrated the perfect crime ended up as just another inmate, a number in a ledger. The story of the Brinks job has been told and retold in books and movies, cementing its place in American folklore. It represents a time when crime was analog and physical, a battle of wits between cops and robbers. The image of the masked men in the counting room remains one of the most iconic visuals in true crime history. It captures the imagination because it walks the line between admiration for the skill and condemnation of the act. Today, the building on Prince Street still stands a silent witness to the events of that cold January night. It has been repurposed and renovated, but the ghosts of 1950 still linger in the brickwork. Tourists walk past it often unaware of the drama that unfolded within those walls. It serves as a physical reminder that history is often hidden in plain sight waiting to be discovered. The legacy of the Brinks robbery is not just about the money or the arrests, but about the fragility of trust. It showed the world that even the most secure institutions are only as strong as the people who run them. It demonstrated that betrayal is the most effective weapon in the arsenal of law enforcement. And it proved that there is no such thing as a perfect crime, only crimes that have not yet been solved. As we look back on this case, we are left with a final thought-provoking question about the nature of justice. If the gang had simply paid O'Keefe his share and kept the peace, would they have gotten away with it? It is a chilling possibility that suggests the line between success and failure in the criminal world is razor thin. The Brinks job remains a masterpiece of planning ruined by the chaotic human element. Ultimately, the great Brinks robbery stands as a monument to human ambition and folly. It is a story of 7 men who reached for the stars and fell back to earth in chains. The money may be gone, and the men may be dead, but the legend of the perfect robbery gone wrong will live on forever. It is a midnight docket that will never truly be closed.